Hi, it's Victoria Ely with Adventure Education, and today's Teacher Talks topic is behavior in the classroom. This is one of the most talked about topics of all of education when it comes to teachers, aside from the pay. Now, there's only so much we can do about the pay, but there is some things that we can do about behavior, and I want to give you guys my opinion. It's not a popular opinion. It is a very unpopular opinion, okay? But just hear me out. Are parents really responsible for the behavior of their child in your classroom? Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people who say yes, definitely yes. These parents are not preparing their students for my class. And then you're going to find teachers like me who actually believe that what a student does in your class is what you have allowed, which means that I am ultimately responsible for the behavior of that child in my class. Now, initiating the behavior is one thing, but allowing it to continue to the point of you got to call security, or to the point of you got to call the parent, or to the point of you have to call the principal. Like, there's a certain limit that we all get to when we have to go the next level, but on a regular everyday basis, if you have to call the principal or the parent or the security every day for the same student or the same students, then there is something that needs to be looked at in your classroom management. Now, I'm not a principal. I'm not an assistant principal. I have been a teacher in the classroom for the last 10 years. And I have never been disrespected by a student in my face. Now, what they say behind my back, ask me if I care. But in my face, I've never been disrespected. Some of the most disrespectful students have shown me respect. And that is because when they come to my classroom, there is a culture, there is decorum. There is a climate that comes from what I create. And so what I want to talk about today is not that the parents have zero responsibility for their child, period. Not saying that. But what I am saying is that if you are unable to manage that student or those same students, then there's something that you might need to look into, do a little self-reflection, and decide, what are you doing to help curb this behavior? And because I believe that all children, while they're in an adult's care, can be managed to a point where they're not creating a huge disruption every day. Because if that's the case, then we all know they should not be in a gen ed classroom, which, we can go back and forth on parents' decisions on keeping their child in gen ed or putting them in other classrooms where there's clusters and small groups, things like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about those students who should be in another class. We're talking about the students who just love to get under your skin. The students that love to throw things in your classroom, or to get up without permission, or to talk while you're talking, or they just refuse to do your work in your class, and that's causing a distraction because other students are watching you address this student. And those are the things we're talking about. And those are the things that I believe is not the parent's responsibility. So, again, hear me out on this. When you go into the classroom on the very first day of school, you are setting the tone for your students when they see you address the first issue that arises. So if that issue is little student A wants to get up and go to the trash can, not one time, but 2 times. If you just allow that when you're wanting to set the culture that to get out of your seat, you need to ask for permission, then you need to address that right then the first time. Don't assume that, little student A won't do that again. No, you have to address it right then. If you want the students to sit in their assigned seats and student A decides they want to sit in a different seat, even if you don't make student A move that day, you have to address that they chose to sit in another seat, but today I'll let you sit there, but tomorrow you're back in your assigned seat. So you've acknowledged the action that they took and you've already corrected it. So when a student does that, or they're doing things on the first day to kind of test you out, kind of test the waters, and you don't address it, you have told the rest of the class that you will allow things to go on in your class and you're not going to address it. So here's what happens. And I can talk about this with parenting or new teachers or anyone who is working with children. If you are a parent or you are a teacher and you do not create a structured environment for that child, they are going to do whatever they want to do because the environment has not restricted them from doing so. So when you first get your students that first day of school, you cannot let them just hang out and chill and do whatever because you are training them that this is the way it's going to be in such and such class. It's the same thing with parenting. You can't let your kids do whatever they want to do. And then when you take them out in public, you expect them to act a certain way. So it's the same thing with your classroom. When you get your students at the beginning of the year, you must have an established classroom management plan. You must have a procedure for what they're doing and what they're not allowed to do. These days, you cannot just have a classroom where it is just fluid. Unless you are working with students who are more mature and they are intellectually inclined and they could just get to the work and do it and you don't have to do too much but facilitate, that's one thing. But for the majority of us teaching in schools where we had to keep our eyes on everything, you don't have that luxury to just let them do whatever. So you must create a plan. You must have rules. I don't care what they say. You need rules for your classroom. What can be done, what can't be done. And the procedures that go with that is when you come in, you do this. When you sit down, you do that. Those are procedures that students get accustomed to when they come to your room. Now, rules are no chewing gum, no cell phones, no getting out of your seat without permission. Those are rules that you set. So you do need rules and you need procedures. When you put all those things together, you have classroom management. Because once one person breaks a rule, you address it and you deal with it right then. Whatever the consequences are, that's based on what you feel is appropriate for the age or for the grade level or even the content area for your students. So if it's extra work or if it's participation points deducted or if it's, no recess or -5 minutes or 7 minutes or recess, whatever the consequence is, it doesn't have to always be I'm calling home. It doesn't have to always be I'm calling the office. It doesn't have to always be, I'm calling security. See what you can manage on your own by being consistent. Because one of the things that I know, because I've witnessed it with my own eyes, is some teachers are not consistent. They get so caught up in teaching and so caught up in what's going on that they forget to keep their rules and their procedures consistent from the first day of school to the end of the school year. If you are that teacher that gets a little relaxed right around holiday time and you feel like, okay, you kind of got your class set now, well, when you come back in January, you got to redo that stuff all over again. You cannot just assume that your kids are going to fall right back into place and that they're not going to want to break any rules or not follow procedures. So my opinion, which is not popular, is parents are not responsible for what children do in your class. What they do is what you allow. And if you don't allow things, then they will learn that early on. Now, how do you get them to buy into your rules and procedures? It does have to be consistent. And you have to be firm with your consistency. You cannot just, be, willy-nilly in it and say, okay, well, today you guys can do this, but tomorrow we back to it. No, you have to be consistent with what your procedures are and what your rules are, because that is what gives them the structure for when they come to your class every day. Now, if you're having a bad day, now, and this is something I really believe I stand by. If I'm having a bad day outside of school, my students have never known it. Not one time have I come into school with stuff going on in my personal life that I brought into the classroom and taken it out on the kids, or if I am not feeling well or something that they notice, that I let my rules and procedures slip. They have never caught me slipping when it comes to my rules and procedures. You can ask any of my students who I've ever had over the years. I was very consistent about where to do this and where to do that. Now, did I create too much structure? Possibly. But what didn't happen was I didn't have students fighting in my class. I didn't have students yelling and fussing at each other across the room in my class. Or you couldn't say nothing to nobody in my class that was negative, and I heard it and I didn't address it. I will stop my lesson if I hear someone being bullied or taunted or whatever. And we're going to address that right now. So I never allowed anything else to get in the way of me being consistent with my students and my classroom rules and procedures. So you have to develop that mindset of, in order to get out of here today without any incident, I got to be on top of my game with my content, and I got to be on top of my game with my rules and procedures in my classroom management. It is not negotiable that you need to be able to do both. Now, the last thing I'm going to say, and this is the part that doesn't really resonate with a lot of people because they may not have the experience. I am a behavioral person. My mind thinks in behavior, my actions are in behavior. So I look at students and I can see things wrong with them. I can see they're not having a good day. I can see that something that just happened, not even 5 minutes ago, they're going to try to bring it in here. And I am responsible for checking that right at the door. If someone lost a family member, I am not going to force that student to do work that day. If I just saw you fussing at another student and you almost got into a fight, but you didn't get into a fight, but you're about to come to my room, I'm going to let you cool off real quick before I ask you to do anything. I'm going to make sure that before I give you an assignment, that you are calm. I've allowed you to decompress. I've allowed you to let it go for a minute. And I actually give them the space in the room to do that before bringing them back into the fold. So you have to be able to recognize behaviors and be able to curtail that before it comes into your room and tries to mess with the culture and the climate that you have already set. So I want to make sure that outside of everything, you teaching your content, you're really good at it. You come to school dressed up to the nines every day, you ready to rock and roll. But if your classroom management is not on point, you're going to be coming up out them heels or out that tie you wore to school today, and you're going to be dealing with some problems that you didn't intend to deal with. So you need to have your stuff together content-wise, because that's what they're really looking for you to do. Ain't nobody coming in there giving you credit for your classroom management. I mean, they do, but that's not what they're really coming in there for. We know they're coming in there to see, how are you teaching the students? Are they understanding what you're teaching? Will these lessons result in some points or some scores that we can be proud of? And that means students are actually achieving. Are we going to be able to see that? Classroom management is just something that it just got to be done. Because if you have good classroom management, you are able to teach. You are able to reach those students who are hard to reach. And on top of that, when you have good classroom management, those students who are the biggest issue in the school, big behavior, always, their name is always out there. When they come to your class, they're not that. You give them respect. You don't assume that they're going to act out in your room. You just show them that you see them. And even if you seeing them is addressing their behavior from time to time, they're not going to lash out. I've had students who, the worst students on papers, like literally just got out of handcuffs, come to the classroom, and I gotta, figure out how to understand this kid. And those years, I've had at least one who will fight security, who will flip a desk, who will cuss you out to your face, all of those things. And do you know, I have never had that happen to me in all of my years of teaching, because I know how to build relationships with students, and it's not something that you can just try to do. You must figure out how to do it, and each student will be different. And that's the key to relationship building with students, is they're all going to be different, and the ones that you want to build relationships with are going to be the ones that have the biggest issues in school, because when they come to your classroom, you want them to learn, not just be quiet, not just sit there. You want them to learn. So I hope, listening to some of my reasonings for why I don't believe it's the parents' responsibility for how their kids act in your class, my reasonings are based on my experiences, and that is what makes it a fact for me. I know classroom management works, and I know when someone doesn't have classroom management, how their biggest issue is classroom management. Their biggest issue is the kids that cause the most disruption in the class, and it disrupts the learning environment for all the other kids. So if you need some tips, or you want to run your classroom management plan by me, or you want to know what my plan is, send me a message, send me a comment, and I will do a one-on-one coaching session with you to help you build that rock solid plan. All you need to know is the basic demographics of your classroom, and that is it. Because you can't go by what you might get. You can't go by what you had last year. You can just go by the culture and the demographics of the school. Because at the end of the day, when you create a structure for your kids, it doesn't really matter who's in the room. They all pretty much fall into place when it comes to the management style that you have. So again, let me know if you need my help. Hopefully you learn enough from here to understand that it is your responsibility to manage the kids, because again, they will only do what you allow.